Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Written by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 20. The Goal of Philosophy. Today is the hope of the world. Here and now we are welding that great chain of tomorrows which extends from the instant to infinity. We live not for ourselves alone but for all futurity. Our accomplishments survive us, for long after we have descended into the earth the orders which we have established shall dominate the activities of men. The world is an ancestral shrine filled with the mortuary tablets of the honored dead. We bow before our illustrious progenitors. We are the substance of their aspirations, the consummation of their dreams, for today is the focal point of time. We are all that has been about to be projected into all that shall be. Each human soul holds eternity in suspension. Recognizing this truth, several modern scientists have formulated the theory that immortality is achieved through a succession of lives, that the Father achieves immortality in his Son, the Son in his progeny, and so on to the end of generation. The torch of life which each expiring personality hands on to another does not go out, it is immortal, but he who bears it must perish by the way. Men are but incidents in the flow of life, yet they have a strange power, for while they cannot cause the vital flame to blaze up from nothingness, they are empowered to snuff it out, and when generations cease the countless ages die together. To be is to be immortal, for that which has been can never utterly cease. The past hovers in the air like a mirage. Men feel its presence, they breath it in, and enveloped by it live their little now. Upon the surface of their polished mirrors the ancient magi caught faint visions of forgotten times. Within the next century we shall discover that history is written in the air, that so-called space itself is photographic, preserving as on a sensitized plate the varied activities of created things. Egypt as a physical empire has long since crumbled into dust, but upon each minute particle of the atmosphere the glory of ancient Egypt is preserved for all time. Men speak words and their words seemingly vanish into nothingness, but in the living substances of the universe these selfsame words are traced in everlasting characters to be read in some distant time by men as yet unborn. Thoughts unuttered are not wholly lost, nor do dreams perish because their dreamer dares not give them speech. Somewhere in the infinite vistas of space, impressed as it were upon the memory of the infinite and sharing together a common immortality, all aspirations, all visions and all deeds await the day when men with unfolding reason will bind all time into a common now. In his experiments with plants the late Luther Burbank found substantiation for the scientific concept of immortality through progeny. The doctrine of natural salvation, as it is called, was demonstrated to Burbank through phenomena arising from the cross-pollination of plants. For example, Burbank pollinated a variety of plants bearing white flowers with another variety bearing colored flowers, and as a result secured blossoms which were wholly white, some wholly colored and still others of mixed colors. Taking a white plant from this cross-pollination test, Burbank pollinated it with another white plant, the result being a number of new plants all white. Taking one of the latter, he again pollinated it with white and the result was again white. This experiment was repeated 10 times. In every case the flowers were entirely white, but the 11th time several blossoms reverted to the original color of the plant, thereby proving that though latent for a considerable period the elements of the first cross-pollination survive to reappear again. The original colored shrub had died long before its activities reappeared among the white blossoms, but Burbank recognized in this phenomena the immortality of the colored flower which was reborn in its own progeny. To Burbank man was but a human plant, and the great horticulturist solved the philosophic problem of his life by observing the habits of the growing things in his garden. If after the lapse of 10 pollinations the identity of a distant progenitor was re-established, was it not reasonable to assume that men are born again to blossom forth in their descendants? Is not immortality the carrying forward of a primitive trace, and is not the urge which we feel within ourselves the voice of some ancestral impulse? For the physical thinker, to whom the invisible universe is simply a vast mechanism and spirit an unnecessary hypothesis, there can be no immortality other than that which is carried in the seed. How small a germ man springs from, yet how much that germ contains, for in each wriggling sperm is the man with character, personality, and individuality. From so slight a beginning, what great issues come, for in the single tiny germ are contained not only the epitome of all the past, but also all the greatness that is to follow. The philosopher takes issue with the scientist, and not as to the accuracy of the conclusion, but rather as to the field to which the conclusion is applied. A fact is a fact, but for the clarification it may often seem half a lie. Recognizing only the physical universe, the savant limits all his premises to physical concerns, with the result that his discoveries are rendered of little value by false emphasis. If man were actually a body, physical immortality would be his hope, and he would indeed survive in his progeny. But since man is not a physical body, the laws controlling the body are powerless over the intangible essence which resides within its innermost parts. Indwelling spirit is not to be measured wholly by its outer form. Body has hands and feet, but spirit has no need of such appendages except when functioning in the physical world. Body has parts and dimensions, but spirit is impartible and dimensionless. Thus, while the laws of physical generation produce the actual phenomena so carefully classified by Burbank, it does not necessarily follow that spirit, which is not material, is dependent upon generation for its survival. It is obvious that spirit depends upon generation for its manifestation in form, but such manifestation is merely a phase in the condition of spirit. Heredity is limited to the sphere of generation. It is of the accidents and not the essence in man. While men may inherit physical tendencies, even physical attitudes and, under some conditions, physical thoughts, this shell of personality is soulless until he animates it with his own immortal principle and gradually shapes it into an appropriate destiny. Heredity only controls such as are incapable of controlling themselves. Steeped in the vibration of its previous states, the stuff from which bodies are made comes to each incarnating soul. The life into whose vehicles it was formerly incorporated set the minute atoms whirling at a definite speed and imprinted upon each of them its own purposes and characteristics. The child coming into the world must battle with these strange vibrations, reorganizing the substances of its body into individual vehicles by overcoming the motion of past agencies and revibrating the electrons according to its own needs. The plant is a victim of circumstances to a far greater extent than is man. To escape its environment, the plant must either die or trust to the unlikelihood of some gardener transplanting it to a more ideal habitat. Man, however, if his surroundings be incongenial, may move at will to an environment more propitious to his destiny. The analogy may be projected into the invisible structures of both plants and men. The evolving plant life is still working through a vehicle too low in its organic quality to respond to the impulses of the inner agent. While man is empowered to resist the impulses of heredity as these incline his physical body in one direction or another, the plant must abide by the dictates of its formal part. The fallibility of the law of heredity has already been proved, and additional evidence of its inaccuracy will be accumulated as evolving man takes more of his destiny into his own hands and relies less upon the elements of chance and environment. As the stars impel yet do not compel, so man's hereditary impulses traced upon the fabric of his atomic nature urge him to follow in the old, accustomed way. The self, however, declares otherwise, and one by one the impediments of heredity are overcome by the onward march of consciousness toward perfection. Whereas science fights to maintain the dignity of form and the supremacy of matter throughout the universe, philosophy would establish the excellence of life and the rulership of all creation by its rational part. If we come to worship matter and elevate the physical universe to first place among the spheres, we can never hope to establish well-being in the nature of men, or fellowship among the nations of the earth. The premise of material supremacy is wholly destructive of the moral sense and reduces ethics to a superstition and aesthetics to an artist's vagaries. All that is beautiful is thus sacrificed in the defense of a premise, and the sovereign good is martyr to a notion. More cruel than Moloch is the god of the materialist, for he would feed whole nations into the maw of greed. To remedy a condition we must discover its cause. Man's boast of a godless age is his undoing, for he who destroys the concept of deity destroys with it the sufficiency of his own internal nature. In his pride that he is now able to govern the universe unaided, the 20th century thinker has given the divinities on high Olympus notice to gather up their belongings and depart. The gods have obliged him. Their thrones are empty, they have left for some other sphere where mortals are less vain. But man is still unhappy. His boasted knowledge has brought him doubt, doubt has brought terror, and terror has sapped away his strength. Afraid that his worst conclusions may yet be true, the materialist clings to his little ball of dirt, shuddering in anticipation of that day when he will be hurled therefrom into the abyss he himself has postulated. The heart of the thinker cannot accept the soulless universe that his mind has declared. How strangely fickle is the mind that from pure imaginings fashions a universal order, and then, dissatisfied with the fabric it has spun, convicts high heaven of man-made inconsistencies. In his New Atlantis, a work unfinished, Sir Francis Bacon recites the virtues of an ideal philosophic empire. This empire, which he calls Ben Salem, the sons of peace, or of the latter, is ruled over by a mysterious institution designated Solomon's House. This house is an order of men united in the quest of universal realities. They are patrons of the arts and sciences and investigators of nature's lore. The whole story is founded upon Plato's empire of Poseidon, the lost Atlantides, or the Isles of the Sea. One cannot read this account of the perfect state without marveling at the scope of Bacon's vision. Herein is set forth the substance of things hoped for and the prophecy of that which must inevitably come to pass in that time the gods decree to be opportune. Bacon claims America to be the lost Atlantis, adding that the Greeks were mistaken as to the sinking of the ancient continent, which was not actually submerged but rather temporarily inundated by tidal waves and freshets in the mountains. The inhabitants of the valleys were drowned, but the more savage peoples who roamed the tangled highlands escaped. In this manner culture was destroyed and only savagery left to re-establish the orders of nations. In his Holy Guide, John Hayden reprints the HEW Atlantis as an alchemical allegory, definitely connecting the book with the Rosicrucian mysteries and, through inference, with the symbols of Freemasonry. The discriminating Mason can hardly ignore the obvious fact that Solomon's House, as described by Bacon, is the temple of universal wisdom and education. Nor can he overlook the several degrees of ascent, whereby men did climb up to the same, as if it had been a scala coeli. In its philosophy the New Atlantis sets forth an ideal government of the earth. It foretells that day when in the midst of men there shall rise up a vast institution composed of the philosophic elect, an order of illumined men banded together for the purpose of investigating the laws of life and the mysteries of the universe. In this labor will be employed the ancient disciplines reconstructed and restated by Bacon in the Novum Organum. Fate decrees that empires must fall and states vanish from the earth, for, erected upon and maintained by selfishness, these shall ultimately be destroyed by the internal dissension generated through selfishness. The age of boundaries is closing, and we are approaching a nobler era when nations shall be no more, when the lines of race and caste shall be wiped out, when the whole earth shall be under one order, one government, one administrative body. As Asgard rose amid the fertile plains of earth, and as the Aesir guided the destinies of mortal creatures from their lofty thrones upon the snow-capped peaks, so upon the earth there shall arise a noble institution destined to lead humanity toward the condition of knowledge. A great city shall be established like the holy city of ancient fable, which shall be the capital of the world, the seat of all power, the hub of world administration. Here an exalted legislative body shall be convened which will mete out the justice of the wise and guide the unfoldment of the indigent many. From the seats of their authority the various heads of human undertaking will direct the destinies of all enterprise. Being in agreement with each other, these enlightened executives will move in accordance with the principles of harmony and compatibility. No longer will the various divisions of society oppress each other. For when all the parts work toward a common end, the excellence of one over another is without consequence. The time has not yet arrived when the average man is strong enough or wise enough to rule himself. Even when unfolding destiny greatly magnifies the accomplishments of the many, there will not come a day when the wisdom of the mass will be equal to the wisdom of its wisest few. As men's minds increase in capacity and establish newer and nobler codes of ethics and morals, there will still be the exceptional intellect that by divine providence excels and by virtue of such excellence demonstrates its fitness for honor and responsibility. By an exceptional intellect we do not mean an individual who through scheme or subterfuge steals glory from the impotent. Such thieves of prestige have a special substratum reserved for them in the realm of retribution. We refer to those illumined philosophers and mystics who, marching ahead of the body of the race, are the only ones actually fitted to directionalize human activities. Never will peace reign upon the earth until we are ruled by the fit, until he who possesses vision is permitted to see for the blind, until he who senses greatness is permitted to interpret its issues for those who are unresponsive to magnitudes. Men are truly free only when, governed by the wise, they are inclined gently toward the perfection of their own natures. Men are truly great only when, admitting the supremacy of the wise, they offer both life and chattel to the service of integrity. Plato dreamed of that glorious day when the wranglings and contentions of mankind would cease, when people would turn from their petty tyranny to unite in a common destiny, when the needs of the many would be removed from exploitation by the few. He dreams in vain, however, who envisions a government of the people or by the people, but he is a seer indeed who can formulate the concept of a rational government for the people. That man is happy who can trust his Lord. That state is fortunate whose prince is a philosopher. Humanity turns toward wisdom when the fruits of wisdom are apparent to it. Having once beheld the rewards of integrity, all men will move joyously toward that state of concord wherein dwell the wise, conserving their resources and fulfilling the destiny of rational souls. We must learn that wisdom is neither book learning nor empty pedantry. The sham studiousness of the sophists was facetiously termed eyeglass believing by the medieval mystics. Our present educational system would be fundamentally opposed to this philosophic program, because the school is the servant of utility and our standards of utility are lamentably insufficient. We teach men to bargain, barter and connive. We are unsparing of both time and money in our effort to fit them into a system obviously impractical. Centuries must pass before the body of society will be sufficiently sickened of the vanities it supports to be inclined toward integrity. Eventually the day of awakening must come, for man cannot suffer indefinitely, and the saturation point of human endurance must sometime reach its limit. The unnecessary burden which we carry and have borne through uncounted ages will then be cast aside, and turning to truth we shall find liberation. Polemics is not necessarily the abode of the wise, nor is much hairsplitting to be confused with erudition. The elevation of a man to high position does not ipso facto improve the quality of his nature or increase his capacity to receive. True elevation is opportunity, but the innate characteristics of the one promoted must determine the use to be made of that opportunity. To remove politicians from power and replace them with scientists or philosophers trained according to our present concepts would not necessarily solve our problem. The sages of Plato's vision are the truly wise, men initiated into the disciplines of the soul and deeply versed in the mysteries of life. In the senates of the philosophic elect, blocks of biologists would not combine to frustrate the legislation of the physicists, nor would astronomers hold out on technicalities against the geometricians. Savants would neither give a little of this for a little of that, nor arbitrate away the rights of men to prolong an ephemeral political prestige. Where the learned differ, it is evident there is no learning. In that city of the wise all the arts and sciences will complement each other, and the disciples of every branch of learning will mutually venerate each other's knowledge. Competition will cease and cooperation will be reinstated as the true life of trade. The bartering of interests, the misappropriation of power, the malfeasance of office, all these are crimes possible only in a non-philosophic age where the blind who follow are unable to discern the fallacies of the blind who lead. For thousands of years a devotee to the fetish of competition, man has devastated that Edenic garden over which the Lord designed him to be the keeper. A poor gardener he has made. He has torn up all the flowering plants which lend beauty to the spot, that in their place he might grow weeds for a little profit. The highest expression of wisdom on the part of the many involves, first, appreciation for the still greater wisdom of the few, and secondly, the high-mindedness to waive the rights of personal privilege that thereby the greatest good to the greatest number may be achieved. Death is the invariable product of ignorance, but life is prolonged in conformity with intelligence. Heedless of our own destiny, in the vain struggle for possessions we often perish for lack of wisdom even as we reach out to grasp the substance of our desires. The plains of earth are broad, the resources of earth are incalculable, and on this globe there is ample to satisfy the needs of all. Through commerce and industry, through legitimate intercourse and exchange, and with reasonable effort man can enjoy those necessities which contribute to his well-being. Acceptance of the false principle of diversity, however, has been man's undoing, for the existence of contiguous states or nations has been the excuse for their exploitation. Boundary lines were originally set up that they might later become diplomatic technicalities, for it was presupposed that an invading horde should someday sweep them away. Nations consequently prey upon nations according to their presumptions of necessity. Strong peoples absorb weaker peoples into themselves, thereby depriving some of that which is necessary that others may have more than enough. Oppression by the invader and retaliatory wars by the oppressed are the inevitable products of such encroachments. Fighting for what he conceives to be his inherent rights, the patriot is a martyr to vain standards and hopeless issues. He opposes ignorance with ignorance, and thus, the sorrows of the ages are compounded. Man destroys man that man may live, life lives by killing, freedom is achieved by intolerance, and, if we are to believe the pronouncements of the foolish, peace is preserved by the sword. Where, may we ask, is the beginning or the end of this vicious circle which survives by destroying and also destroys by surviving? Occasionally we find an individual of such innate perversity that he will actually cheat himself in material things. In matters pertaining to the spirit, however, dishonesty is quite the common order. In our foragings we generally descend Assyrian-like upon the stranger, still reasoning with primitive caveman logic that that which is not already our own is legitimate prey. With the abolishment of political states and the unification of all peoples into one great nation, the misunderstanding directly due to national jealousy and competition would be outlawed, for what people would be so foolish as to raise an army for the conquest of that which is already part of itself and cooperating for the sovereign good? Such a national attitude, when once established, would constitute a powerful moral deterrent to individual conduct. So far-reaching is the influence of our environment that in a comparatively short time the spirit of competition, as applied to individual concerns, would be broken and men would build into the common pattern of public weal instead of striving to acquire a passing supremacy over the bodies of the dead. To be a wholesale killer is no longer the hallmark of greatness, for no strength is stronger than that which, withholding the hand, prevents violence. No courage more courageous than that which, facing the problems of each passing day, fights the battles of peace. Upon first thought it may be difficult to visualize a world ruled by philosophy instead of politics. What is politics, however, but the philosophy of government? Is it not universal law applied to the government of men, and should not the one who is made a ruler over others be conversant also with those sidereal forces by which the order of creation is maintained? If a knowledge of cosmogony and universal law were a prerequisite to rulership, how many of our present governors would occupy their official chairs? Yet, for the regulation of human affairs, what pattern is more sublime than the harmony of the celestial spheres or the innate orderliness of crystal formation? The science of mundane government has failed because it has ceased to be a science of government and has become a science of personal interests. What is responsible for this perversion and misdirection of executive power? Simply the elevation of the unfit. We recall the words of that satirist who, philosophizing upon the effects of the French Revolution, declared that the reign of terror had taken the affairs of the state out of the hands of a despotic few and transferred them into the keeping of the unqualified many. Let us never forget the words of that great Jewish statesman, Disraeli, who said, "The world is weary of statesmen whom democracy has degraded into politicians." The theory of democracy is one of the noblest yet conceived by man. It is the aristocratic gesture of the proletarian. It fails, however, because at no time can man be more than himself, for man's government, like his God, perforce must be but a highly magnified reflection of himself. The true seat of government is in the home. In his apothegms of kings and grand commanders, Plutarch describes a reformer who was discussing with Lycurgus the setting up of a democracy in Sparta. "Pray," retorted the Spartan lawgiver, "do you first set up a democracy in your own house?" Governments obviously cannot succeed where men fail, for we are the makers of government and our statutes unsparingly reflect both the depth and the shallowness of our own individual selves. When the citizen is told to appoint a representative, he generally takes the advice too literally. If the leader resembles too faithfully his constituency, he is unable to point out to his following any course of action which they could not have discovered by their own efforts. Hence, the interval of rationality should intervene between the governed and the governor. When this interval of superiority is insufficient, our vices and not our virtues become the rulers of the state. Democracy, writes Lowell in the Bigelow Papers, gives every man a right to be his own oppressor. Each faction of the people mistakenly assumes that its primal need is a representative who will interpret its whims and further its own particular ends at the expense of all other groups. Philosophy, however, corrects this attitude, declaring that the popular need is a virtuous mind strong enough to incline the populace toward a greater good. The spokesman of the masses seldom says anything, for the voice of the masses is the incoherent babble of many voices in which no single voice is intelligible. The political philosopher should be an idealist, not a realist. Not content with preserving things in their present state, he should desire to elevate them to the state of the ideal. Government is the science of leadership, the philosophy of administration, the art of reconciling the apparently irreconcilable viewpoints of the many. Of all the sciences, government demands the greatest measure of integrity. A position requiring a superlative quality of integrity and involving the widest sphere of influence should, by every rule of logic, be reserved for the wisest and best fitted. Only that man who is above personal interest is a safe politician, for the citizenry suffers when so-called public servants are the servants of their own desires. Only when the world is ruled by its best balanced intellects can we expect it to be well ruled. We have never had a sufficient number of illumined leaders to permit the smaller nations a proper and adequate form of government. Only by combining into a single people and choosing the wisest of men regardless of race or creed to directionalize the activities of the human race, can we approach that philosophic empire which Bacon, profoundly versed in the theory of government, advanced as the true solution of empire. When inferior intellects are chosen to administer governmental destinies, dissension is inevitable in the state. The true philosopher is the born ruler of men. Though now considered impractical because he lives in a world divorced from personal interest, in reality the philosopher dwells in the sphere of things as they ought to be. Contemplating, as he does, the eternal verities of the universe, he is peculiarly fitted to ponder the affairs of government, for from such contemplation of eternal verities he has come to realize that if any institution is to endure it must be patterned after the enduring qualities of the universe. By incorporating universal truths into the social structure the philosopher effects the stabilization of society. The true ends of philosophy are not realized in the spinning of vain theories or fourth-dimensional wool-gathering. Philosophy is the pondering of problems, the quest for solutions, the effort to organize life so that by conforming his life to the dictates of rationality man may come to enjoy the maximum of peace, efficiency, and individual completeness. As each age comes into manifestation it brings with it a definite philosophic revelation designed to solve the problems peculiar to that age. These revelations are keynotes of thought and by their aid we bridge the ethical intervals between generations. Racial systems of culture now dead are remembered chiefly for the words of power which they passed on to the civilizations that succeeded them. Through the tangled mystery of time we have wound our way, achieving according to the measure of our understanding. In philosophic history certain outstanding individuals have come to be regarded as the epitome of vast orders of learning. We regard these individualities as the formers and reformers of doctrines and orders of life. Thus, all the elements of Hindu Brahmanism are gathered into one colossal personality, Manu, the giver of the law. As the embodiment of Egyptian culture, Hermes founded the mysteries of statecraft, giving to the world the doctrines of universal order and procedure. In ancient Greece the half-mythical Orpheus established the cult of beauty, teaching men the gospel of rhythm. Then to Asia came the strong voice of Buddha, calling men to the way of renunciation and the noble eightfold path. Again in Greece, while pondering the science of numbers, Pythagoras revealed God to the world as the great geometrician, bidding men enter upon the mathematical life. Then Socrates, the immortal proletarian, affirmed the necessary to be the greatest good, giving men the gospel of justice. In China, Confucius, the unapatheicized saint and utilitarian of the celestial empire, expounded the worship of the immanent and the service of the now. In Syria, Jesus, the rabbi of the Essenes, preached the gospel of friendship, seeking to unite the diverse interests of mankind in the fellowship of the Spirit. To Arabia, Muhammad, the desired of all nations holding high the sword of Islam, brought the philosophy of retribution and a righteous destiny. Modern religious and philosophic concepts thus comprise an intricate eclecticism, combining the reconcilable elements of these and various other revelations. The faith we live by is woven from many threads. We are the sons of the prophets of elder days, and half-heartedly we strive to keep the varied array of their commandments. But behold, the dawn of a new era is at hand. Humanity has elevated itself in temporal things far above all previous states of power. National strength has become so dominating as to require a code more ample, a revelation more specific. Ascendancy brings with it great responsibility, and the ethical structure of society must be rendered stable if integrity is to be preserved amid the temptations of preeminence. Never before has the lawgiver been faced with a problem involving humanity as a whole. Previous revelations have been addressed, for the most part, to single nations or chosen peoples. The prophet of those days brought that which was necessary for the survival of his own clan and the well-being of that particular order of which he himself was a part. Thus, while each of these messages contains elements of truth that are imperishable, they are not wholly suitable to present needs. For this age we must have a doctrine of synthesis, a code actuated and dominated by the spirit of unification. The supreme need is to blend the diverse interests of men into a common purpose. The philosophy of this age must reveal the interdependence of the Chinaman and the Turk, the white man and the black, the great and the small. In other words, we have need of a common denominator, a fundamental premise upon which all will be agreed, for if we are to establish the government of the philosophic elect it must be erected upon the foundation of mutual understanding. Today we have one set of laws for men who live in the valleys and another for those who dwell upon the hills. The diversified interests of a great populace require many representatives to interpret those needs at the seats of government, for the tiller of the soil is a stranger to the captain of industry, and the financier in the environment of his money world little senses those broad impulses animating the souls of poets and philosophers. Humanity has grown to be so strong that it is now dangerous to allow its parts to remain disunited. No longer can we maintain our position of isolated individualism without endangering the rights of all men. The old truth that man cannot live by himself alone is still true. The ever-increasing strength of the individual confers upon him an ever-increasing capacity to injure, and unless the desire to hurt ceases within his own soul he is capable of infinite destructiveness. The same is true of nations on a grander scale. War has revealed the destructive potentialities resident in aggregations of people. Communities apparently benign and harmless can be metamorphosed overnight into a death-dealing mechanism which, justifying its destructiveness, like the Macedonian phalanx from which it was derived, can move across the face of the virgin earth and leave nothing but shattered hopes and smoldering ruins in its wake. This power to injure, inherent in human nature and now scientifically organized and trained to wreak the fullest measure of evil, is an impending menace against which the race must protect itself. The social structure is infected with the hereditary taint of war, and none is so wise that he can predict at just what point the plague will break out next. In such emergencies laws are impotent, preachments in vain and moralizings futile, for intoxicated with the lust for power men will turn against all that they formerly held dear and in the name of patriotism march ruthlessly to their own ultimate destruction. When they have loosed the dogs of war, men study Napoleon, not Socrates. When the bloodletting is over and men have turned from the gory altar of Ares, they seek solace not in Caesar's memoirs but in the words of Jesus or Buddha. But man's forethought always comes behind, for he keeps the power of devastation in his own name and invokes deity only during the reconstruction periods. After the plenitude of destruction has been wrought, a repentant people like naughty children turn to their eternal parent for sympathy. In those more placid moments when our emotions are at rest and the stagnant pools of our desires are left unstirred, we are indeed a noble race, striving for a heavenly crown. But when greed stirs up our bile, we revert to a most barbarous and primitive type, eagerly trading our equity in a state of future bliss for a few square leagues of more substantial earth. From all of which it is apparent that as yet no spiritual revelation has come sufficiently strong to successfully withstand the inherent weakness of the flesh. The rewards promised for virtue are so distant and ephemeral that they do not tempt mere sordid men as do the instantaneous compensations which are apparently the rewards of perversion. Centuries must yet pass before the human soul will be sufficiently liberated from the involvements of the material nature to dominate and directionalize the activities of its objective nature. We have come to a day of intensive classifications, of vast industries and corporations, of factional organizations. Each individual is ambitiously striving to become a specialist in some department of the arts, sciences, or professions of living. Each one's goal is to attain a position of familiarity with his subject which will enable him to corner the field and exploit it to his own aggrandizement. It consequently follows that when men simply use each other as means to further their own selfish ends, there must result an ever-decreasing bond of understanding between them, for their selfishness and divergence of interest inevitably segregates and eventually results in utter isolation. Like rays of light pouring from a radiant center, humanity today is traveling at an incalculable rate towards diversity, limited only by its innate capacity to diverge. A new keynote must consequently be struck, a new word of power sounded, a new message brought which will warn men that in this mad dash toward diversity lies annihilation, that this senseless separateness of interests must ultimately result in a confusion of tongues and the obliteration of all effort. The highest message of yesterday was the message of friendship, an effort to unite men in a common cause. But friendship has proved insufficient as a remedy. For friendship is capable of perversion. The undeveloped man is a natural abuser of privileges and a perverter of issues. Friendship has become the chosen institution of rogues, and thus, the power of evil has been strengthened, for when thugs fraternize, the entire social order is at hazard. It has been demonstrated that the powers of evil, unable to lean upon the infinite, which was presumably against them, have developed the pernicious habit of depending upon themselves and each other, with the result that virtue is a disorganized and vice a well-regulated institution. Friendship has failed, first, because men could not understand it and hence degraded it to a tool of interest, secondly, because to the average individual it is an artificial relation established in an effort to create a condition which did not naturally exist. Men have mouthed the word until it has become obnoxious and synonymous with the vagaries of a decadent faith. As yet we have not reached that point in our spiritual unfoldment where universal friendship is apparent to us. When you tell a man that friendship exists in nature and that God has decreed his creations to live together in amicable relations, he may point to the jungle law where every animal lurks behind a bush ready to devour the passerby. Or he may ask you to explain the earthquake or the storm and the host of natural agencies which conceal their affinity for each other so successfully that only a theologian can hope to discover them. The new message is the gospel of identity. It is not an effort to unite lives in a common interest, but a recognition of the fact that all forms are but manifestations of one indivisible agent. According to this concept, there are no longer two who can be friends, but rather one that cannot be divided and in whom the sense of diversity is an illusion of form and not a reality of spirit. No longer must we conceive of that type of friendship in which several parts fraternize and all too often patronize, but rather that indissoluble unity which is fundamental throughout the universe. To the wise, however, this is not one life working against another, but the parts of one life moving upon each other. Cataclysms possibly evidence a magnified form of those same inconsistencies which man manifests when he deliberately injures some part of his own body for the gratification of a whim. The gospel of identity is not one that can be thundered from the pulpits, preached from the housetops, or harangued in the marketplace. It is something that must come to be realized, that must be felt within the nature itself. It is that fundamental unity of each with all, that power which discovers all things within the self and the self within all things. The gospel of tomorrow will be a gospel of one being. No longer will a million universes or billions of half-formed creatures struggle out the destiny of worms, no longer will there be a seemingly endless, crawling, seething mass of minute lives, for out of his Tashido heaven has come the Lord of tomorrow, the sovereign of eternity, whose doctrine is that of identity. The star and the gnat will be united, suspended as it were from a single monad, one in essence, though several in aspect. No longer will there be the great and the small, but one spirit moving inevitably toward itself. No longer will there be a great order of evolving lives, but rather one ideating whole, an expression moving from itself outward to the inclusion of all. Today we live in an involuting civilization, a civilization of separateness, a world dedicated to the concept of struggling with the parts of itself, a world obsessed with the illusion that the self has parts. We must overcome the belief that self can rise up against its own nature, or that spirit is fragmentary. For that one man should compete with another is as senseless as that the fingers should fight the hands to which they are attached, or dissent from each other as to their individual supremacy. From the condition of primitive isolation man has raised himself through successive revelations to a limited capacity to understand the issues of life. A few broad-minded, far-seeing individuals have recognized the fundamental equality of life and have issued an emancipation proclamation declaring all creatures by right of their divine origin to be entitled to a place in the sun. From equality it is but a logical step to identity. So the enlightened man who has been elevated to that point where, when he meets another man, he says, "You are my friend," will tomorrow meet that same man and say, "You are myself." No longer will complicated codes be necessary to administer human affairs when each man's interest becomes the interest of all the rest and each man's needs the needs of all. Laws are largely established to govern relationships, but when all relationships are done away with, laws will pass with them. For the one is always itself and the intervals for which theoretical relationships are remedial agencies cannot exist in a united body. An intellectual concept of the gospel of identity is not sufficient. In fact, intellectualism is the trap by which most minds are ensnared. A fact is not established by the intellect, but by a deeper power which we like to term realization. Hence the truth of identity is demonstrated by the realization of identity. Never will we have true equality until we realize that equality is based upon identity, for that which is self is equal to self, and upon the appreciation of this fact democracy is established. Democracy is not the condescending, patronizing attitude of the politician. Nor is it the system whereby 100 million folk of uncertain mind are empowered to elect one from their number as their leader. Democracy is the realization of the unity of life, and this realization shatters forever the competitive standard of civilization which is based upon the erroneous assumption that one part of life can survive without or at the expense of another. Competition was founded upon the dualistic theory, an ancient anthropomorphism in which two spirits wage an endless fight for supremacy. So wherever two individuals, institutions, or nations conceive a separate origin or a separate destiny, we have the boast that one will be holier than the other. As long as we conceive of separateness in origin and ultimate, there will be grounds for competition, and upon the basis of competition is erected the whole structure of human sorrow. We have an age, therefore, in which the parts struggle with each other, a world that thinks it has accomplished greedy when it picks its right pocket to fill its left pocket. Diversity is simply the manifestation of those potentialities that are ever within the substance of unity. The universe is simply the objectification of a single causal agent. This does not imply that all things are alike, but rather that while they may differ in non-essentials, as, for example, external composition, they are composed of the same agencies and essences. The gospel of identity includes the theory of difference, not difference from the standpoint of inequality but from the standpoint of condition. The philosopher does not infer that a gnat is a star, but that in their essential natures each is the manifestation of a common life and that whatever may occur to one is registered in the single life principle that agitates them both. We have a civilization in which each part is attempting to include the whole within itself. Man as an individual dreams of the day when he can dominate men as a mass, failing to realize that such dominance is in appearance only and that the individual can never be more than he is, one of the many. Through consciousness he may elevate himself to the point where he and the many are one, but having achieved this exalted goal he ceases to be himself and becomes the many, thinking in the terms of the many and serving the ends of the many. The gospel of identity shows man his true greatness, namely, that he possesses the power to interpret the whole and can actually come to realize his kinship with all. Through such realization he achieves philosophic liberation. He who escapes from the littleness which is his not-self, into the vastness, which is his real self, achieves greatly and serves the sovereign good. There is but one cure for selfishness, namely, to realize that nothing can be added to us and nothing taken from us, that we are what we are and have what we have. We may temporarily possess a certain measure of opulence, but unless it is our own it will depart from us again. Yet in departing it is not gone, for that which is the possession of any one is ultimately the possession of all. What use, then, can there be for selfishness when he who believes that he takes from another really takes from himself? And why should not a man be generous when that which he gives to another he gives to himself? In philosophy there is consequently neither giver nor receiver, in that the gift, the giver and the receiver are one. The spirit in man is not merely a life enclosed within a frame. Man is really a frame enclosed within a spirit. The thing in you that says I am is identical with the thing in me that says I am. Then why should we not unite in common purpose? Why should we struggle for a little outer glory and battle with shadows in the service of our greeds? If he so desires, each individual by receding into his own divine nature may discover within himself the divine nature of all creatures. He may even become every other creature, for that part of himself which is real is every other creature. In the annihilation of the sense of separateness we annihilate both life and death, for when we identify ourselves with the one life moving through all things how can we end? As long as there is life we are that life, as long as a single star twinkles in the heavens we are that star, as long as a single blade of grass grows we are that blade of grass. We are not of the same race as those hands and feet which we have so long identified with ourselves, we are not that driveling creature, clutching at power, that mad thing of destruction which tears and rends in childish rage and harbors revenge within its heart. When we have recognized the universality of spirit we are one with the very fabric of life and are no longer tortured with fears and premonitions. In our folly we have tried to be petty despots and establish empires of our own. We have desired the gold braid and tinsel of princes and are peevish when someone takes away our principality. Let us turn from our petty despotism to behold that greater glory which is our natural right, for we are citizens of eternity, we are that very life that in the beginning moved upon the face of the deep, we are that shining power that walked in the garden with the Lord. We are the seraphim and the cherubim and the choirs of the ineffable. We are not gods, we are God exiled for a little while into the forgetfulness of ourselves, yet soon to awaken to the full measure of our splendor. O slumbering life, awake from your dreams of manyness and soar into the free air of concord. Turn from the wheels that you have set spinning in the building of an ephemeral empire. Depart from the unsubstantialness which you have come to love too well and lift your eyes to the contemplation of a nobler state. You have given so much for a little power. You have become so weary in your fruitless quest of gain. The world asks so much for the little it can give, and that semblance of happiness which oppression has given you is so shallow and devoid of peace. Philosophy summons you to a greater calling, a more noble profession, a more excellent destiny. The sages of old would welcome you into the brotherhood of the elect, into the true ranks of the immortals where life flows on in broad full sweep throughout all eternity. Leave the half-built world which crumbles even as you raise its structures, for the Great Mother already has shaken countless civilizations from off her back. The very dust beneath our feet cries out with desire unfulfilled, for it is the powdered substance of ambition. Only in truth is there sufficiency, only in reality is there power. The unity of life is man's great truth, upon which foundation he may build the empire of his soul. He is rich who is rich in truth, he is poor who is poor in truth. All else is of little moment. We are immortal, and that our soul tomorrow may be in peace, let us rebuild our civilization. Let us establish our government of realities, our commonwealth of the wise. We as citizens of today are also the citizens of tomorrow. We are the life that shall throb in the communities yet to come, we are the voice that shall speak in the senates of an unborn day. To that great life, which is our true self, to that tomorrow which to us must ever be the now, let us dedicate our inner selves and the achievements of our external natures.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.